Hey, welcome to Planetterrian Daily, episode 59, coming to you on May 10th, 2026. Here's what's new in science, health, and longevity research. A neural brake on scratching has been found that prevents over-scratching once itch relief begins. Researchers traced the brake to the ion channel TRPV4 in sensory neurons. In mice lacking this channel, overall scratching dropped. Yet the animals kept going longer once they started, which shows the molecule normally limits itch-driven behavior. The finding comes from chronic itch models and points to a targeted mechanism for conditions like eczema. Instead of suppressing the immune system broadly, therapies could focus on restoring or mimicking this internal off switch. The TRPV4 channel functions as a molecular timer that tells sensory neurons when scratching has gone far enough. In chronic itch states, loss of this signal leaves the system unable to stop even after relief arrives, which explains why some patients scratch until skin is damaged. What other common sensations might be kept in check by similar timers that remain unmapped? Now, shifting to atmospheric chemistry, the 2022 Hunga Tonga eruption destroyed large amounts of atmospheric methane. Volcanic ash, seawater salts, and sunlight generated formaldehyde and reactive chlorine that rapidly broke down methane released during the event itself. The process shows how a single underwater eruption can alter global atmospheric composition on a short timescale. Current climate models do not yet include this kind of sudden chemical sink, which leaves open questions about how future volcanic activity might offset or interact with human emissions. The result adds a new variable to methane budgets that scientists will need to track more closely. On a different note, hidden channels beneath our Antarctic ice shelves are accelerating melting in ways current models miss. Warm ocean water becomes trapped in long cavities carved under floating ice, which intensifies basal melt from below. Because this process is not represented in most projections, estimates of future sea level rise are likely too low. The finding comes from direct observations of ice shelf hydrology and highlights how small-scale fluid dynamics can scale up to affect coastlines worldwide. Researchers are now working to incorporate these channels into larger ice sheet simulations. Next up, time delivery of 2 growth factors restored digit regrowth in adult mice after amputation. Sequential application of FGF2 followed by BMP2 allowed bone and soft tissue to reform in ways that do not normally occur in mammals. The Nature Communications study demonstrates that adult mammalian tissue retains latent regenerative capacity when given the right molecular cues at the right times. This is not yet a therapy for humans, but it opens a route for stimulating limited repair after injury or surgery. The work sits in regenerative biology rather than drug development and focuses on the sequence of signals rather than a single compound. Moving to diagnostics, retinal imaging can detect multiple systemic diseases beyond the eye itself. Patterns in the retina were linked to several non-ocular conditions in a new analysis, offering a non-invasive screening route. Most people assume an eye exam only checks how well you see or whether you need new glasses. In reality, the retina is an extension of the central nervous system that shares blood supply and cellular features with the brain and other organs. Right now, as you listen, light-sensitive cells in your retina are already exposing subtle changes in blood vessel structure and nerve layer thickness that can signal diabetes, hypertension, or early neurodegeneration. A single high-resolution scan captures roughly 100,000 individual data points across multiple layers, far more information than a standard blood pressure reading. Because the retina sits behind a clear optical window, these measurements require no needles or radiation. Clinicians are beginning to use the same images to track treatment response in conditions far from the eye, and upcoming studies will combine retinal imaging with AI to flag cardiovascular risk years before symptoms appear. The approach could eventually replace some blood tests or distant imaging for routine screening. Turning to genetics, intrinsic human lifespan heritability reaches roughly 50% once shared environment and lifestyle are properly controlled for. A science study refined earlier estimates that had been inflated by unaccounted confounders. The result clarifies that genetics explain about half the variation in how long people live, while the rest remains open to behavioral and environmental influence. This adjusted figure gives researchers a clearer target when studying the biological limits of health span. It also underscores that longevity is not purely inherited, and that interventions can still move the needle for most individuals. In gut health research, a black licorice compound reduced intestinal damage in inflammatory bowel disease models fast. Using stem cell-derived human intestinal tissue, researchers screened thousands of compounds and identified glycyrrhizin as an anti-inflammatory candidate. The molecule lowered cell death and tissue injury in both the lab model and in mice. The work shows how organoid platforms can accelerate discovery of compounds already present in the food supply. It remains early stage, yet it points toward new ways to protect mucosal tissue without broad immunosuppression. Finally, psychedelic-assisted therapy was linked to reduce severe depression in real-world data. Patients receiving structured psychotherapy plus LSD or psilocybin showed substantial and lasting drops in depression and anxiety scores. The observational findings add support for lasting clinical benefit when these compounds are paired with therapy rather than used in isolation. The data come from clinical settings where dosing and psychological support were carefully managed. While not a randomized trial, the results strengthen the case for continued controlled investigation of these approaches. Before we go, keep an eye on how retinal imaging combined with AI might begin appearing in routine cardiovascular screening within the next year. That covers today's science and health news. Share this with someone who's curious about the latest research. I'm Patrick in Vancouver. See you next time. This episode used AI voice synthesis of my voice. Editorial selection and analysis are my own.